Our last example of a Flemish artist during the Northern Renaissance is going to be Peter Bruegel the Elder. So you can see we are on still in section 6 of our typed outline on the Renaissance. And like I said, this is our last example of a Flemish artist during the Northern Renaissance. When we look at the works of Peter Bruegel the Elder, we don't see much of an influence by the Italian Renaissance. Now notice I said not much. There is little that he was influenced by the Italian Renaissance. So what did influence him was the new technique that artists were using of perspective. So we do know that Bruegel did use perspective to create more realistic scenes, okay? But you're not going to see much more influence from the Italian Renaissance artists other than that use of perspective by Bruegel. We know that his works tended to focus mainly on the lives of ordinary people and how they would just live their everyday lifestyles. He would often focus his works on non-elite members. So when we say ordinary, we're not talking about the very elite. We're talking about peasants or merchants, for example. And so that tended to be the subject matter of a lot of his paintings. You can see one example of his works depicted here, and it's titled The Peasant Dance. So this is a great example to show you that his subject matter usually focuses on the ordinary, for example, the peasants of the time. Another well-known example of a Bruegel painting is this one titled Battle Between Carnival and Lent. So before I go into some details about this particular work of art, I want to switch over to a document to give you some background on what was going on culturally with the people that lived during the Renaissance. For you to understand this painting, you do need to know the culture of the time. So I've included a copy of this handout that I pulled from two different sources, one being your textbook and another being a different AP European history textbook that I often use for sourcing. This would be a good idea if you could print this out. Again, I've got a copy of this on Canvas for you to print out, because what I'm about to do is go through this and show you the key parts of this that I would highlight. If you don't have a highlighter, you can underline these key things that you need to understand about the culture during the Renaissance. This first paragraph here, you can see I've highlighted some of the key components dealing with the group activity known as festival. So as you're highlighting your copy, I'm going to point out a couple things about festival. It says festival is a broad name used to cover a variety of celebrations. Community festivals in Catholic Europe that celebrated the feast day of the local patron saint. You've got annual festivals like Christmas and Easter that go back to medieval Christianity. And you've got carnival. Carnival was the most spectacular form of festival, which was celebrated in Spain, Italy, France, Germany, and Austria. All of these festivals were special occasions when people ate, drank, and celebrated to excess. In traditional societies, festival was a time for relaxation and enjoyment because much of the rest of the year was a time of unrelieved work. So really they can just kind of let loose and have some fun. Now this next paragraph is going to give you a little bit more details about carnival specifically. So this information right here, make sure you highlight it where it says carnival was celebrated in the weeks leading up to the beginning of Lent, the 40-day period of fasting and purification preceding Easter. Carnival was, understandably, a time of great indulgence, just the reverse of Lent, when people were expected to abstain from meat, sex, and most recreations. Hearty consumption of food, especially meat and other delicacies, and heavy drinking were the norm during Carnival. So is intense sexual activity. Songs with double meanings that would be considered offensive at other times would be sung publicly at this time of year. Then if you'll skip down to this last part down here at the bottom and highlight where it mentions, finally, Carnival was a time of aggression and a time to release pent-up feelings. Most often, this took the form of verbal aggression, since people were allowed to openly insult other people and even criticize their social superiors and authorities. Certain acts of physical violence were also permitted. People pelted each other with apples, eggs, flour, and pigs' bladders filled with water. So understand that Catholic countries were allowing their people to participate in this type of festival known as Carnival. It came right before Lent, and so it's allowing the people to release a lot of their aggression and sow their wild oats, just kind of let loose before the official period of Lent begins, where you have to abstain from all of these wild activities like drinking and dancing and, having all of these, free lifestyles, okay? So again, the Catholic Church approves of Carnival. The best way to explain this to you is when we have Mardi Gras, okay? That is a festival that dates back to the Middle Ages with the Catholic Church, doing exactly what we just described. In the second column of your handout, this just tells you a little bit more about Carnival so you can have, again, that thorough understanding. It is a time of reveling and excess in Catholic Europe. It says here it preceded Lent, 40 days of fasting and penance before Easter, in case you're not familiar with that practice by the Catholic Church. And for a few exceptional days in February or March, a wild release of drinking, masquerading, and dance reigned. Peasants were allowed to dress as nobles and men as women, and rich masters waited on their servants at the table. This annual holiday gave people a much appreciated chance to release their pent-up frustrations and aggressions before life returned to the usual pattern of hierarchy and hard work. And y'all, this very last part, I tried to zoom in on it, but it's not letting me, so I'm just going to read it to you and just make sure, again, you highlight it or you underline it on your copy. These elites who had previously shared the popular enthusiasm for religious festivals, carnival, drinking in taverns, blood sports, and the like, now tended to see superstition, sin, disorder, and vulgarity. So that background that we just went over dealing with Carnival and how Carnival is a time that precedes Lent, that is important for you to understand what we're going to talk about in the actual painting itself. So here in the painting, I want to point out a little bit of symbolism to you. First of all, you can see here on the left, this is basically an inn or a tavern where basically people can drink. This is going to represent Carnival, people letting loose and getting out their frustrations with all the drinking and the eating of meat that's going on. Versus over here on the right side of the painting, this is representing a church. I don't know if you can tell, but these are nuns coming out of the church. So that is going to represent Lent. So we clearly see a battle between, Carnival and Lent However, all of these people are coming together. So while you have the drunkards leaving this inn, on the other side of the painting, you have those nuns emerging from the church. And here in the center, you have the two groups all meeting and mixing together, which is depicting, you know, a quote-unquote fight between the two periods. So keep in mind, again, of the subject matter of Brueghel. He often depicts the ordinary as they participate in their everyday lifestyles. In this case, we see the mixture of the social classes. It's not just the poor, but also the rich are participating in Carnival, because all Catholics, rich or poor, will participate in the event known as Lent. We see people participating rather than just spectating. You know, they're not just all sitting around looking at each other. They're actually involved in activities. We also know that this is very communal rather than an individual type activity. You know, everybody has come together no matter what their backgrounds are. So a couple more symbols I want to point out to you before we wrap this painting up. Here towards the bottom, I'm going to zoom in for this character who also represents Carnival. You see here, there's the close-up image of him. He's obviously sitting on top of a beer barrel, or it could be a wine barrel, and you have obviously meat on a skewer. So that is a great depiction of course, Carnival, whereas with Lent, they would sustain from eating meat and, of course, drinking for 40 days. And then in this close-up image, we see Brueghel depicting Lent, what he would call Lady Lent. Lent is being depicted as this gaunt, mournful woman who seems to be sickly and starving because during Lent, they do refrain from eating meat. That's why you can see here there is fish that's going to be cooked. And oftentimes they do fast during this time. So in Brueghel's point of view, a lot of people don't necessarily enjoy going through Lent. It's something that they do because it is part of their religious beliefs, but it's not something that they necessarily want to do. So this painting is a great example of Brueghel's well-known interest in depicting ordinary subjects and their everyday lives. We went over some of the leisurely activities as far as the characteristics, you know, with, again, everyone participating rather than speculating. You've got a mixture of the social classes instead of the focus being always on just the elite, like it was during the Italian Renaissance art. And we have communal activities rather than individual playing out. So I hope you now have a better understanding of the subject matter when it comes to Brueghel. To finish up Roman numeral 6, we have a little bit of information about the German states for the art, and I'm going to save that for the next video.